Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at a specific day in history and examine the events of that day and the historical context in which the events occurred, the historical ramifications of those events, and we also take a look at some people that were born on that day and some people that died on that day. As always, please hit the like button, the subscribe button if you haven't yet, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, February 28th. And this day in 1844, the USS Princeton exploded during a pleasure cruise down the Potomac River. The gun had fired off 3 previous times downstream, and it was ready to fire a 4th time on the return voyage, and they were going to fire near Mount Vernon. The gun had a mishap and exploded and killed several members of the crew, including Secretary of State Upshur and Secretary of the Navy Gilmer. It could have also been worse. President Tyler was aboard the ship and would have likely been killed had he been above deck when the gun exploded, because his Secretary of State and Navy were killed instantly, as they were very close to where the guns were fired from. And this would have not only been a tragedy because the president would have been killed, but this was in 1844. In 1841, Tyler had become the first president to succeed a president who died in office when President Harrison died. And there were still questions to whether or not Tyler was the legitimate president. And there was no vice president. At that time, when the president died and a vice president succeeded to the White House, there was no 25th Amendment to the Constitution, and you didn't have a mechanism to replace the vice president until the next presidential election. So the question of who succeeds to the president then becomes even much more foggy. It's generally perceived at that time that the presidency would have devolved to the president pro tempore of the Senate. Some deaths that occurred on this day. Some births that occurred on this day. Births that occurred on this day. In 1931, in Emporia, Kansas, Dean Smith was born. Smith was the longtime coach of the North Carolina Tar Heels, and was very known for his outspoken views on politics and matters of race and education. Was a very strong supporter of desegregation. Smith also was known for running a clean program and a program in which his players graduated. He was very proud of that. He boasted a 96.6% graduation rate of his players. And one nice thing that Dean Smith did when he passed away was he willed a $200 check to every player who lettered for him at North Carolina with a personal message, "Enjoy dinner courtesy of Coach Smith." And these were very successful, prominent men like Michael Jordan, Vince Carter, and others who played under Smith and were, very capable of buying a fine dinner for themselves, and, not just huge basketball players, but men that succeeded in business. But he thought that this was a personal thing that he could do for them to remember them by, and to me it just says what a nice person he was. Some deaths that occurred on this day. In 2009, at the age of 90 in Phoenix, Paul Harvey died. Paul Harvey, of course, was the longtime host of News and Comments with Paul Harvey and the rest of the story from 1962 until 2008. And it's estimated that he reached about 24 million listeners a week during the time that he hosted the program. As a young child, if I was out of school during the summer, I would always know about noon on the radio, News and Comments with Paul Harvey would play. And I would gather by and listen. And in the afternoon, if my grandmother would pick me up from school and my father would get off work and drive us home, we would listen to the rest of the story. And Paul Harvey would end it by saying, "And now you know the rest of the story." And Paul Harvey, many of the products that he promoted, I can still remember the Bose radio system, the Bose radio. I have a Bose soundbar on my television, and it's a great product. I can see how the Bose radio was so much of a high cost item. Paul Harvey, definitely a national treasure. One of those figures from Americana that just everybody knows his voice. And in the Super Bowl commercial a few years back, God Made a Farmer, that's Paul Harvey talking. He also has one about police that is in the same vein. So Paul Harvey, just one of those seminal figures from American history that everybody knows their voice and everybody can remember at some point in their lives listening to them, even if you don't remember it. And I say the rest of the story, you're like, that's Paul Harvey. Or News and Comments, it's Paul Harvey. Just an American icon. I'll see you all tomorrow for This Day in History. If we have results from South Carolina early, I might post a South Carolina reaction video, but I imagine that will probably be on Sunday. I'll see you all then.